And from that day forth, they refused to answer to their dead name, ignoring or chastising anyone who insisted upon using it, identified as neither male or female, asked not to be referred to with traditionally gendered pronouns, and asked simply to be referred to as the public universal friend, Puff, or simply the friend. So the first person that I'm going to talk about is the public universal friend. So the public universal friend was an American preacher who was born in 1752 in Cumberland, Rhode Island. They were assigned female at birth and initially given the name Jemima Wilkinson. They were the 8th child of Amy and Jeremiah Wilkinson, who were both Quakers. For anyone who's unfamiliar, Quakers belong to a sect of Protestant Christianity, and they're formerly known as the Religious Society of Friends. In 1776, at the age of 24, the public universal friend fell extremely ill with what was most likely typhus and was bedridden for some time at near death with a high fever, which are circumstances under which people very regularly died at the time. However, after several days of being on a death watch, the friend's fever broke, and they claimed that Jemima Wilkinson had died and her soul had ascended to heaven. The public universal friend claimed that upon death, Jemima Wilkinson had received revelations from God through 2 archangels who proclaimed that there was room in the many mansions of eternal glory for thee and for everyone. The public universal friend claimed that the body of Jemima Wilkinson had died and had been reanimated with a new spirit charged with preaching his word. And from that day forth, they refused to answer to their dead name, ignoring or chastising anyone who insisted upon using it, identified as neither male or female, asked not to be referred to with traditionally gendered pronouns, and asked simply to be referred to as the public universal friend, Puff, or simply the friend. After this, the friend began to travel and preach throughout the nearby US states, beginning to draw quite large audiences at their worship meetings, during which they would typically recite very long passages of the Bible verbatim from memory. Their followers began to form a congregation of so-called universal friends, making the Friend one of the earliest known white Americans to form a recognized religious community within the country. Most of the Universal Friends were from Quaker backgrounds themselves, but the mainstream Quaker movement at the time disowned the public Universal Friend and their siblings who traveled with them, and disciplined members who attended the Friends meeting or meetings. By the mid-1780s, popular newspapers and pamphlets had begun covering the Friends' sermons, with some being particularly critical. And this criticism almost exclusively related to the Friends' gender nonconformity rather than their teachings, which were for the most part essentially identical to the mainstream Quaker teachings of the time, to the point that one of the 2 publications that the Friend released throughout their life was a direct plagiarism from Quaker teachings. In line with some of these more traditional teachings at the time, the Friend rejected ideals of predestination and election, believing that anyone, regardless of gender, could gain access to God's light, and preached the possibility of universal salvation, essentially the belief that all sinners, no matter the sin, would eventually be reconciled to God. The Friend was really outspoken on the abolition of slavery and successfully persuaded several members of their congregation who kept slaves at the time to free them. They preached humility and hospitality towards everyone, kept their meetings open to the public fully, including those who were just curious and wanted to come along and see what the deal was. They openly welcomed members of Indigenous and Black communities, which at the time was a pretty big deal. And yeah, they did still hold quite traditional views of marriage and celibacy, but sort of maintained that neither was essential. And they welcomed a significant number of unmarried women into their congregation. In fact, their closest sort of rank of followers were a group of about 4 dozen unmarried women who came to be known as the Faithful Sisterhood, and took up leadership roles within the congregation that would have traditionally been reserved for men. The preacher asserted that women should obey God rather than men, and the proportion of households headed by women in the society's eventual religious settlements was significantly higher than any others around them at the time. The Society of Universal Friends ran into some significant legal trouble while attempting to secure land for their religious settlements. And in 1799, a group of disillusioned former followers attempted to have the Friend arrested for blasphemy. An officer tried to seize the Friend while they were out horse riding, but as a keen equestrian, they were able to escape. And after a couple more arrest attempts, the Friend eventually appeared in a court in June 1800, where it was found that no indictable offence had been committed, and they were actually invited to deliver a sermon to those present in the court. At around the turn of the century, the Friends' health began declining, and they eventually passed on June 1st, 1819. And yeah, I think particularly within the context of America, the Friends' impact on society from both a queer and a religious historical sense was profound, and they've retroactively become known as one of the earliest publicly identifying gender diverse people in America. So I will pass on for now.